You've spent months building a secure M365 environment, but one click can open the door to your entire document library. Frustrated by blind spots in SharePoint and OneDrive sharing, we'll walk through a practical framework, policies, scripts, alerts that lets you finally see and control what's leaving your tenant, even at massive scale. Why your audit settings might be lying to you. If you've ever opened your audit logs and felt a quiet sense of relief thinking everything is covered, there's a good chance you're missing some of the biggest gaps. Most admins tick the auditing box in the compliance center and assume job done. They set the policy, see audit log search enabled, and move on. But Microsoft 365, especially SharePoint and OneDrive, hides a lot of nuance under those options. The default settings feel comprehensive, but the cracks show up at the worst possible times, like months into a sharing fiasco when everyone is digging through logs and realizing half the story isn't even there. Let's take one scenario that comes up more often than we'd like. Imagine your finance team needs to work with an external consultant on a set of sensitive budgets. The SharePoint site owner shares a folder, makes it easy for the consultant with a guest link, and gets back to business as usual. Fast forward a few months, the consultant's project finishes, and suddenly there's an audit. The finance lead wants to know exactly what got shared, when, and with whom. You open the audit logs and find nothing useful. No entries tracking when that folder link was created, no logs showing access or downloads. The environment looked secure, but the actual audit trail, like Swiss cheese, more holes than data. Here's the part that catches people out. Microsoft's default audit policies are optimized for performance, not completeness. The documentation buries this point, but if you go digging through recent admin guides, you'll notice that standard audit logs can miss entire categories of sharing actions. This is especially true for anonymous or guest access links. Any auditor who's been burned by missing entries, like for SharePoint external sharing invitation created or OneDrive anonymous link used, knows the pain of scrambling to rebuild what happened after the fact. We've worked with organizations where the official stance was, we're secure, we have auditing. Then during a compliance review, maybe after a legal hold was triggered, someone tries to track back an external share. Instead of clear logs, they find entire gaps. During a recent legal review for a healthcare org, legal counsel pulled up the audit log to find out who accessed protected health info via a guest link. The entries stopped right before things really went off the rails. The project had to pause, teams went scrambling, and worst of all, no one could say for sure what left the building and what stayed internal. It's exactly this kind of uncertainty that puts compliance projects at risk and sends everyone into damage control mode. If you want a visual, picture two screens side by side. On the left, an environment running Microsoft's out-of-the-box audit policies. The list of sharing events looks reassuring at first until you notice the missing records for guest link creation, file previewing by external users, or cases where links were forwarded inside a thread. On the right, the same side, but audit logs are configured with advanced settings, catching not only who shared what, but exactly how those links behaved after the fact. External accesses show up with timestamps, the types of links are noted, and even which files were accessed through a chain of guest forwards. You don't just have a log, you have a map of what really happened. So why does this keep happening? For most environments, 3 audit policy settings don't get touched during rollout. First, you need to explicitly enable enhanced auditing for SharePoint and OneDrive, which often means using PowerShell to set policy at the organization level. Without it, sharing events covers just a narrow slice of what's actually going out. Second, make sure to capture anonymous link usage, not just link creation. Sharing to someone outside the org and then having those links get broadly distributed among personal accounts creates a gap if usage isn't logged. Finally, increase your log retention window. The 90-day default might sound generous, but with guest projects or legal investigations, you'll want a much longer trail. The difference between having 6 months of forensics and 3 months can be the difference between answering a regulator's question or drawing a blank. Here's where things get real. Even the best reporting scripts or fancy dashboards mean nothing if the raw log data isn't there to begin with. Too many teams race ahead into automation or CM integrations, only to hit a wall when the base audit configuration is half-baked. If your compliance officer or legal team is expecting clarity and the logs can only tell a fragment of the story, you're not just at risk, you're flying blind. So what do you actually need to Flip for full visibility. Enable advanced auditing for SharePoint and OneDrive at the tenant level. Make sure you're logging every kind of external link and internal sharing event, and bump your retention out as far as compliance allows. It's not about getting more data for the sake of it. It's about having a record of every action that matters before a rogue file share lands in the wrong inbox. Now, with your audit logs finally collecting the right events, the floodgates open. That's where the real challenge kicks in. How do you cut through the noise and find the risky activity that actually deserves your attention? Turning audit noise into action, PowerShell done right. If you've ever tried to make sense of a SharePoint or OneDrive audit log, you already know the feeling. The data just keeps piling up. It's not just overwhelming, it's relentless. Yesterday's export was long enough. Today, it's grown by another few thousand rows. You scroll through page after page, but instead of finding a crisp timeline of risky events, you're buried in a spreadsheet that reads like a court transcript of every click in your environment. Getting the logs isn't the hard part anymore. Anyone with proper permissions can run a command and spit out every sharing event that's happened across the tenant. The real challenge? Knowing what even matters in the first place. Now, exporting this data is almost a rite of passage for Microsoft 365 admins. Fire up PowerShell, connect to security and compliance, and maybe you aim for a week's worth of data just to keep things manageable. But then you hit that export results button and end up with 10, maybe 20,000 lines in a CSV. What are you supposed to do with a mountain of information like that? Sift through one row at a time? Cross-check email addresses and hope something catches your eye? That's not monitoring, it's digital archaeology. The reality is most PowerShell reporting scripts you'll find out there scrape everything with broad queries: get admin audit log config, search unified audit log, export mailbox audit log, the list goes on. You get a master list of events, but nearly every script throws it into a file as is. These exports aren't smart. You have the who, the what, maybe the when. But try figuring out which events point to risky behavior, users sharing intellectual property, HR files landing in the wrong inbox, or a guest link sneaking out to someone's personal Gmail. Instead, you're left with endless logs of who opened a file, who updated a document, and scattered references to sharing invitations with no context about what's sensitive or who's truly an outsider. Let's drop into a real scenario. Picture an admin, let's call them Sam, tasked with reviewing external sharing throughout the month. Sam dutifully pulls down the logs every Friday, only to see spreadsheets stretch into the tens of thousands. One tab shows hundreds of sharing created and sharing set events. There's a list of usernames, 100 different document titles, and a blur of timestamps. But at no point do these logs scream red alert. Sam's supposed to find patterns, but the patterns are hidden by noise. For every actual risk, confidential team plan sent outside the company, there are 1,000 routine shares between project teams or calendar invites. Sam starts flagging by gut feeling, but it's guesswork. Here's where that old saying rings true. Context is everything. Knowing that someone shared budget 2024 XLSX is mildly interesting. Knowing that it was sent to Outlook user at gmail.com instead of a partner domain is a headline. This is the critical difference between the raw audit logs and truly actionable intelligence. It isn't just about tracking who shared what. That's the easy part. The real insight comes from answering, was that document actually sensitive? Was it shared with someone external to the business? Did it involve a OneDrive link that's been opened by a personal email? Or did it target a known business partner? If your reporting script can't answer all that, you're still stuck in the fog. This is the point where most people realize the tools you find online aren't enough. Let's play out a comparison. On one side, you've got the generic script, export unified audit log, default columns, no filtering. You end up with a fire hose of data, every event labeled sharing initiated or anonymous link created, but with zero prioritization. On the other side, imagine a targeted PowerShell report that does some real lifting. It checks the target email address, flags domains outside your company, and pulls in file sensitivity labels. Suddenly, your report highlights suspicious shares. HR benefits, PDF sent to a Gmail address shows up red. Project plans shared with partners stay green. The data tells a story. Plenty of organizations have seen this play out, especially as remote work ramps up. One healthcare group started sending a weekly external sharing digest to security. It looked fine for months, until one week there was a noticeable spike in at hotmail.com and at gmail.com recipients. That prompted an audit right away. And sure enough, a recently departed employee had shared a bundle of documents to their own personal inbox. If they'd just used raw logs, that spike would have gone unnoticed in spreadsheet purgatory. By pulling out who, what, and especially to whom, The team was able to act fast before anything sensitive got out for good. Of course, capturing the right slice of data isn't a one-time fix. Patterns shift over time. Maybe last month's reports missed a brand new category of sensitive files, or a PowerShell filter didn't catch a new domain for a project vendor. Once you've filtered the noise and surfaced meaningful events, you're halfway there. But risks don't play by your reporting schedule. So here's what actually works. When you build out your script, pull exactly what you need. Specify the sharing event types you care about. Add logic to check for non-corporate domains and loop in document sensitivity. Run searches for sharing set and anonymous link used. Pipe the output into a custom filter and deliver a report that doesn't just bury you in hundreds of success entries. You want the handful of need to call someone now alerts. Suddenly, your audit logs stop being just busy work. They're the warning system you actually need. Still, even a perfect PowerShell report only helps after the fact. What about catching dangerous sharing as it happens, instead of days or weeks later? Real-time risk detection, alerts that actually work. If you've ever set up alerts for external sharing in SharePoint or OneDrive, you probably remember that mild sense of accomplishment right up until your inbox lit up like a slot machine. It sounds good on paper. Alert me whenever a document is shared externally. And then you realize almost instantly that it's completely unsustainable. It's that classic dilemma. If every incident is important, pretty soon, nothing feels urgent. You're wading through dozens, even hundreds of auto-generated notifications. And after week 2, they're effectively wallpaper. You create rules just to move them out of your main inbox, making the entire system meaningless. On the flip side, if you dial back the alerts too far, suddenly the biggest risk slips right through the cracks. No alert, no warning, nothing to see until the damage is already done. Setting up alert policies in M365 is technically simple. The wizard walks you through the steps, asks which activities to monitor, and you just check the boxes. That part's not the problem. The disconnect starts when we try to make those alerts useful, not just noisy. The default options look tempting. Notify for every sharing action or send an email when external access is granted. But these broad triggers almost guarantee alert fatigue, and that's the fastest way to have your security team tune out the real threats. Think about a real-life case. An organization configures an alert to fire for every document that's shared outside the company. First morning, 100 pings. By the end of the week, no one's reading them. They're stored, technically, but there's zero context around what's truly risky. So a confidential finance file and a team lunch invitation get treated exactly the same. The irony is over-alerting can become just as dangerous as under-alerting because eyes glaze over at the first FYI and it all blurs into background noise. So how do you move beyond the spam? The trick is to ditch the catch-everything mentality and get sharp about what behaviors actually matter. Not every external share deserves the red alert treatment. What you want are signals, not noise, especially those that point to compliance hazards. Sharing to a personal Gmail or a non-corporate domain. Sensitive document showing up at an unfamiliar destination. A guest user who's never been in your system suddenly accessing 6 confidential sites in an hour. These are all classic examples where your team should hit the brakes and investigate immediately. To get there, start by identifying which sharing activities really do need focus. Look at what's actually happened in your environment. Have there been cases where HR files, financial data, or intellectual property ended up outside authorized partners? Is it personal emails accepting guest links, or is someone sending documents to unapproved cloud storage accounts? Use these past incidents as a reference point and create your rules around them, not around every possible event. Ask yourself which file types, naming conventions, or user groups should light up your dashboard. If every marketing update triggers a warning, something's miscalibrated. Let's break down the mechanics. Instead of a single broad alert, you configure layered criteria. In M365, you can set up alert policies that combine access conditions, file sensitivity labels, and external domain patterns. For example, instead of alerting every time a document goes out, send a real-time notification only when a document tagged as confidential is shared with an external guest, or when the recipient's email matches patterns like gmail.com or yahoo.com. Visualize this. Not a barrage of single trigger pings, but a flow of targeted alerts that escalate based on predefined rules. The alert creation interface lets you stack conditions, document sensitivity, file location, user group, and destination email. It's granular and it works. Let's make it concrete. A team shares out routine sales flyers. Those pass quietly as they should. Suddenly, an HR file labeled salary planning gets flagged because it's gone out to an unknown user at a non-corporate address. That singular event triggers a clear actionable alert, not 50 routine reports. Security sees the notification, verifies the recipient is outside the allowed domain list, and revokes access within minutes. This is exactly where targeted alerts pay off. Less noise, more action, and faster remediation. But here's what still trips people up. Even good alerts are only as strong as the patterns they're built to spot. If your rules aren't evolving, you're back to square one with blind spots. The best teams routinely review their incident data, update alert thresholds, and cross-reference with new types of risk as user behavior changes. Maybe a new business unit is spinning up sites and sharing externally in ways you hadn't planned for. Or Microsoft changes how link sharing works, and suddenly your old rules don't catch everything. The system has to adapt, or your alerts get stale fast. The payoff here is a set of real-time alerts that surface the true risks in your SharePoint and OneDrive deployment without drowning you in background chatter. The right policies not only call out the big events, but make acting on them fast and repeatable. Of course, as usage grows and your environment gets more complex, those alerts need to scale too. What started as a simple setup for a handful of departments soon needs to support a company 10 times the size with entirely new compliance commitments. Scaling and sustaining your monitoring system. If you've ever felt good about a monitoring setup for 50 users, the sense of order that comes with it until the user count jumps to 5,000 and things fall apart. That tiny, manageable system that let you review every alert by hand quickly turns into an avalanche. It's one of the most common traps, designing controls around the current state and forgetting that environments don't stand still. New hires, new teams, and another round of department-led site creation can upend everything you thought was nailed down. If you're lucky, you catch it early, but more often than not, it's the Monday morning call from compliance or security that forces a scramble. A monitoring system in Microsoft 365 isn't a box you tick during a big migration and then leave in the corner. The tools, the reports, and the underlying logic all need to track the evolving shape of your business. It's easy to get lulled into a false sense of confidence when things are calm, but the second site provisioning goes self-service or a department starts spinning up OneDrives for every project, you find out just how brittle your setup really is. It honestly feels like SharePoint and OneDrive are chasing shadows. Spend all your time tweaking for today's risks, and tomorrow, someone launches a new set of sites without telling IT. Consider what happens during a merger or acquisition. Suddenly, the number of SharePoint sites doubles. Old PowerShell scripts that were scheduled to poll all sites created as of last quarter start missing half of what just spun up. These new collections don't inherit your existing audit settings by default. Your regular reports come in on Monday, but half the new guest links and sharing events have fallen through the cracks. By the time you notice, guest access might have been running for weeks with little real auditing or alerting. The reality is, any major change, be it more users, a new region lighting up the tenant, or compliance rules tightening up, can break the best laid monitoring plans overnight. It helps to get granular about how SharePoint and OneDrive behave as your usage scales. SharePoint is collaborative by nature. Sites, libraries, and shared workspaces scale out as teams and departments grow. OneDrive, on the other hand, is deeply personal and becomes harder to control the more individuals are encouraged to share files directly. SharePoint sites tend to have more structured permission models with group-based access, making monitoring slightly more predictable. But with OneDrive, individual users can create hundreds of sharing links, some internal, some external, making traditional scripts sluggish at best and blind at worst. The script that worked fine for every SharePoint site with more than 10 members becomes a bottleneck when 15 new teams pop up overnight. If you're running a weekly report that used to take 2 minutes and now takes 45, your system is telling you it's time to adapt. Now think about what a sustainable, scalable monitoring system actually looks like. Imagine a diagram laid out on the whiteboard. At the base, core PowerShell scripts collect audit logs from both SharePoint and OneDrive. Layered above that are automation functions, maybe run in Azure Automation or with Logic apps, triggering regular exports without manual intervention. Next comes your filtering system. Scripts or services examining every sharing event, sorting out the normal from the potentially risky. Alert rules sit on top, running in real time as new sites, documents, or users appear. Finally, an admin dashboard catches every flagged alert, rolling up high-risk events from hundreds of sources into a view that doesn't leave you playing catch-up. The strength of this approach is that you're not dependent on a single log, script, or alert. Each layer supports the others, catching changes that would otherwise slip through. Plenty of global companies have had to make this shift. One high-growth tech firm found that their manual reporting setup couldn't keep pace with the quarterly headcount spike. They built a system where, as soon as a new business unit spun up sites, Azure Automation would detect it, apply the organization's advanced audit settings via PowerShell, schedule regular report generation, and funnel alerts to the right ops teams. That same process managed to flag a surge in external sharing after an acquisition before it became a headline issue. No more hoping someone would manually spot the problem in an ocean of log entries. The takeaway? Let automation cover what people can't possibly track on their own. Microsoft makes a habit of changing settings, introducing new sharing mechanisms, and moving the goalposts with compliance requirements. If your environment is still depending on scripts written years ago or auditing, that's manually applied to a list of known sites. You're inviting risk every time something new launches. Future-proofing comes down to 3 habits. First, automate onboarding for every new SharePoint site and OneDrive so your audit settings and alerting rules follow users, not the other way around. Second, review and update your scripts regularly. Track Microsoft's roadmap, watch for changes in the audit log schema, and test filters for new sharing features as they're released. Finally, use dynamic reporting. Instead of hard coding a list of sites, pull real-time lists every time a report runs. Your controls should learn as your environment changes, not force you into months of manual catch-up whenever a merger or new business launches. The difference between a monitoring setup that fails at scale and one that evolves is this: automation doesn't just buy time, it's what makes true coverage possible. Keeping audit and alert systems fresh is a constant process, but it means your team doesn't have to rely on luck or after-the-fact reviews to stay safe. And as your company grows, merges, or pivots, sustainable systems let you focus less on fire drills and more on proactive risk detection. With all of that humming along in the background, you end up freeing your best people to actually analyze the context of alerts, not just chase missing data. That's how you build monitoring that flexes with your business, no matter how quickly it changes. And once you've got the foundation working, the way you think about risk and controls will start to shift. Instead of treating compliance as a series of reactions, you get ahead. And that's the mindset that stops blind spots before they ever become a headline. If you can actually see your external sharing, you can control it. Blind spots are what cause trouble and make compliance incidents so messy. Every environment has at least one area that goes unnoticed. Think for a second, where is that in your tenant? Maybe it's a legacy site, a OneDrive someone forgot about, or a set of guest links never reviewed. The reality is Microsoft gives you the tools and controls, but it's your processes and monitoring system that turn those features into something bulletproof. So what will you do to find that blind spot before it creates your next headache?